So just to summarize, there are four different types of alimony in Florida. Is that accurate? I hear bridge the
Correct.
gap, rehabilitative, traditional, and what was the fourth one?
Temp-
Welcome back to the show, Joshua Tyson, a seasoned family law attorney here at the DeVries Law Firm. He's going to help us unpack the important topic and provide guidance for anyone navigating alimony issues. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Let's start with the basics of alimony. Alimony plays a significant role in family law, and understanding its purpose is the first step. Josh, tell us, what is alimony and why is it awarded in Florida?
So, alimony is when one spouse is ordered to continue paying the other spouse even after a divorce is finalized. The way it's done in Florida is that the party that needs the money or would have to show the court a need and show that the other party has the ability to pay that those funds.
Well, what are the different types of alimony in Florida?
So we have what is known to most people as traditional alimony. It's durational alimony. It's where they owe you a set amount of money for a specific length of time. Florida used to have permanent alimony, however, that was eliminated last year. Another type is temporary alimony. That is an alimony that is only good until the end of the divorce. So, say the two of you are now living separately, you were previously not working, the other side can pay you to cover your bills until the divorce is finalized. Now, once it's finalized, the other two types are bridge the gap, which is to get you somewhat into a new living situation. It's capped at 2 years. And then you have rehabilitative alimony, which is if you need to go back to school or do some type of training to make yourself self sufficient. And with that, you have to propose a rehabilitation plan to the court and show the amount of money that you would need.
So, just to summarize, there are four different types of alimony in Florida. Is that accurate? I hear bridge the
Correct.
gap, rehabilitative, traditional, and what was the fourth one?
Temporary.
Temporary. So, tell me, how does the length of the marriage impact alimony eligibility?
So the length of the marriage will determine how long you'll be able to get alimony for. Prior to the change in the law last year, it was at 7 years. It's now at 10 years to go from a short to a moderate term marriage. And that increases the amount of time that you can receive alimony.
Can alimony be requested during separation or only during divorce?
Only during a divorce because we don't have legal separation here in Florida.
And how does Florida's no fault divorce law affect alimony claims?
No real effect on it because Florida will listen to claims of adultery when it comes to alimony. So if you are dissipating marital funds um, and having an adulterous affair, the courts will listen to that and take that in consideration as a factor whether or not to award alimony to the other side.
Are there any other issues that would come into court similar to adultery or with regards to an alimony argument?
Not particularly as far as a fault. There are other factors the court take a look at, but none of them really to that adultery level. There are more factors like the length of the marriage, the standard of living, and things of that nature.
So, breaking it down, what are some of the common misconceptions you hear about alimony?
One is that alimony is only for women. That is not correct. We have plenty of male clients that receive alimony. There are people who think that you're just out to you know, kind of live off of the person that was making more money during the marriage. And that's also not true. You have to show the courts that you have a need and that they have the ability to pay the money before anything will be awarded for the state of Florida.
So, let's get into calculating alimony. What factors do the courts consider?
So you've got the standard of the marriage, what each spouse's life was like during the marriage. Were you taking lavish vacations? things of that nature. The age and capacity for earning of each party is also taken into consideration. I believe we discussed the adultery issue earlier. They will also take into consideration. Those are some of the major ones looking into an alimony claim.
How does the court decide the duration of alimony payments?
So that's done by calculation. Um, if you are in a short-term marriage, you're very unlikely to get durational, and then you can get up to 60% of the length of the marriage if you get into a long-term marriage, which is now over 20 years.
Are you saying now over 20 years? Is that a recent change?
Yes, that's along with the changes from last year. Moderate used to be 7 to 17 years. It's now 10 to 20 years for a moderate term marriage.
And what was long term, over 17 at that point, or?
Yes, over 17 was long term. Now it's over 20.
So when discussing alimony, how is the income of both parties calculated for alimony?
So the court will take your gross income and work out what taxable deductions you have to see what your net income is. From there, take out your monthly expenses and find out whether each party has either a surplus or a deficit each month. If you are the one requesting alimony, you'll need to show a deficit and be able to show that the other side has a surplus in excess of the amount you're requesting for alimony.
Now, you just did bring up an important part a minute ago, like lavish vacation and such. How does lifestyle during the marriage impact alimony awards?
So again, that's a factor of the alimony calculation. So the courts will listen to what you've been doing to make sure that you're both able to still live that type of lifestyle. They're not going to limit you. So if you were to move out and you were the one who was a homemaker during the marriage, they're not just going to say, oh, well, you only need your rent and groceries covered. They'll try and keep that same standard in place, assuming that the other side has the ability to afford that. They're not going to make them pay to keep you in a lavish lifestyle to cause them to struggle.
Now, when it comes to retirement accounts and pensions, does that affect alimony at all?
It can very limited, just in the money that is available to each party is taken into consideration. But if you're not currently receiving those are just future assets. The court isn't going to, I think, put too much weight into your retirement or pension accounts.
Staying on that question, is the retirement or pension account, does alimony stop when someone retires? Or does it continue even after they start receiving a retirement or pension account?
There is a presumption that once you are either retired for the common age of your profession, or if you've hit the federal retirement age for Social Security, that alimony would be terminated at that time.
Now, is there a limit to how much alimony a spouse can receive?
The only limit is that it can exceed 40% of the person paying's gross income.
Give me an example of what you mean by that.
Sure. So if, for say, I was making $100,000 a year and I were to get a divorce, my spouse could not receive more than $40,000, which would be 40% of my gross income.
Is that fairly new? Is that also a recent change to Florida law, or has that been around for a little while?
That goes in line with the new changes that were made last year.
So let's talk about uh, potential earnings or vocational training. How do both of those influence alimony decision?
So potential earnings in vocational, if the court finds that you are intentionally underemployed, they could certainly impute you at a higher income for alimony. And what that means is they can say, you should be making this. We are going to treat it when determining whether you have a surplus or deficit as though you are making that amount because you're voluntarily making less than what you should.
So when imputing income, is alimony the only place where the courts impute income, or are there other issues where imputing income comes into play?
Certainly not. The court will also impute income for child support purposes. Specifically, if you are unemployed and there is no health reason why you are not working, the court will generally impute you at that point at 40 hours a week at minimum wage.
Now, while you're going through the divorce process, can the paying spouse negotiate the amount of alimony?
Certainly, yes. While the process is ongoing, the courts, in fact, encourage the parties to work these matters out themselves.
So, is there a limit to that, or is it the parties can work it out and whatever that they agree can stand?
Whatever the parties work out in regards to alimony will stand. If it needs to be modified later, it is modifiable to be lowered, but you cannot raise it after the fact.
So, our next few questions are going to be based around enforcing alimony. When alimony isn't paid, the recipient may need legal assistance. Let's discuss how enforcement works. What steps can someone take if their ex spouse refuses to pay alimony?
So the simplest thing would be filing a motion for contempt with the court, letting the court know that they're not paying and that this is negatively affecting you.
Well, how can the courts enforce alimony payments?
Generally, what we'll do is called an income withholding order. It's essentially garnishing the wages of the person that is set to pay.
And how can you explain a little bit more how that's completed?
Sure, we have it filed with the court. The court signs off on it. It goes to the employer of the person who has to pay. If that employer does not withhold the income that is set to go to the spouse receiving the alimony, then the employer would become responsible for those funds. And so I've never seen an issue where they don't do so.
So, are there any penalties for failing to pay alimony?
Certainly, it's much like failing to pay child support. It generally starts with the court letting you know that this needs to be done. It's a relatively easy slap on the wrist and very quickly will progress if the court finds that you are intentionally disregarding their orders, up to incarceration.
So, what happens if the paying spouse, let's say, moves to another state or even another country? Do they still have to pay, or are they all scot free?
They would still have to pay. If you move to another state, there's generally something in your order requiring you to update the court on your financial income so that they can have an updated income withholding order done. If you move to another country, assuming it is one that falls under the Hague Act with us, then we can still take the money from you from the state of Florida. That's one of the reasons that a document that we request is a notice of social security number. That way, the court has access to each party's socials in the event someone tries to flee.
Now, let's assume that somebody's been awarded alimony, their spouse stops paying. What's the easiest way for them to document non payment of alimony?
Generally, they won't need to document the non payment of alimony if there's the income withholding order. It's tracked through the state. And so the state will have a history of payments. And so you would just need to contact the Department of Revenue and get the payment history on your alimony.
But that's not always the case, is it? That income withholding orders are required for alimony?
They're not required. And if you don't go through the state, then the easiest way to document it would be just showing the court where there's been nothing coming into your banking accounts. And you can even subpoena records from the other side where they would need to show that they have made such payments.
So, what role do attorneys play in enforcing alimony agreements?
So in enforcing the agreements, we you would come to an attorney to file the motion. We can, in a much expedited way, get those heard before the court so that payments can be restarted. Because and generally, a lot of times this will happen when someone tries to move jobs or begins getting paid under the table. We can get that started, and if they're to where they have to pay directly to the state as opposed to it being garnished. And if you don't make those payments, the state's going to track it, and they will file a contempt without the person not receiving payment having to do anything.
Can alimony be collected retroactively if payments were missed?
If payments were missed, yes. So if it's already been awarded and then you don't pay for 2 months, you would still owe that 2 months that was missed. But you cannot collect retroactively prior to an order for alimony being awarded.
All great information. I think this segment did a really good job about talking about if you're the one receiving alimony, but I really want to flip the script to help those that are the payors of alimony. So let's discuss what happens when alimony needs to be modified or terminated. People's circumstances change, and alimony agreements may need to be updated. Under what circumstances can alimony be modified or terminated?
So whenever there's a substantial change in the circumstances of the parties, one that I think immediately comes to mind for everyone is job loss or reduction in pay of the person that has to pay. It can also be that the party receiving now receives much more money from their job, or if they remarry or are cohabitating, they may be waiving their right to alimony by doing so.
Is that an automatic? So let's assume that my ex-spouse that I'm paying alimony to cohabitates or remarries. Is that an automatic reduction of alimony, or will they still be able to receive alimony even though they're now remarried?
So it's not automatic. You would need to file with the court to have it modified. And there are certain instances where cohabitation would not result in the termination of your alimony. Remarriage almost certainly would under any circumstance.
How does one document cohabitation? Or how would you recommend if somebody's trying to build a case to reduce alimony and they know that their spouse is cohabitating, or former spouse, I should say, what's the best way to help document to be able to prove that case?
So, fortunately, when we file to modify alimony, the financial requirements from the court also trigger. One of those is a lease or deed. And so if the two of them are on a lease together, that's going to be your easiest way. The other would be going through their financial statements and seeing what they're paying for rent every month. And again, they will have to turn over their lease so you can see if they are receiving money or only paying half of the money for what the total rent that they owe per month is.
Discussing those alimony agreements, can they include clauses for modification?
Certainly, yes. We often will have them in to where cohabitation is not a triggering factor for alimony or for modifying alimony in the future.
So, what I'm hearing correctly, if you're the payor, you really want this clause in there that cohabitation will, but if you're the payee, you're going to want to make sure you're going to try not to include that.
Correct. Correct.
Now, I asked this question earlier, but I do want to just circle back. Does retirement affect alimony obligations once either spouse retires?
So when you retire, you'll want to file to terminate alimony with the court because your retirement doesn't automatically trigger it, but it would be a reason to terminate.
Can alimony orders be modified without going to court?
No, you can mutually agree amongst yourselves that you'll either take less money or make payments in a different manner, but ultimately to enforce them, those would need to be ratified by the court.
So it would be your recommendation that if the parties agree that they do something within the courts to enforce or be able to make that so it's no longer enforceable, or vice versa.
Correct. You would want it ratified by the court so that if the other party doesn't hold up to their end of the modification, you can have it enforced.
What is your recommendation to help individuals protect themselves from unfair alimony modifications?
From unfair alimony modifications, definitely keeping track of payments that have gone on. Um, I, I have one now. I don't want to get too into specific details of a case, but if a party has what the courts call unclean hands, that's certainly something that could protect you against a modification If the person owes you money and you are now cohabitating because you don't have the money to live on your own because they're not paying the alimony that's owed to you, that is a legal defense against modifying your alimony due to cohabitation.
Well, you bring up this terminology, unclean hands, and I know that's a legal terminology used in all sorts of cases, but what is unclean hands with regards to alimony? And I'm not asking you to talk about any specific cases, but in general,
Right.
what is unclean hands?
So, unclean hands is when you are seeking relief from the court when you're coming to them also at fault. You have helped create the situation that you are looking to now take advantage of for your legal benefit.
As my final question from this episode on alimony, what advice do you have for someone facing an alimony dispute?
If you're facing an alimony dispute, you're going to want to definitely go through all of your financials. Make sure that you are claiming all of your expenses to the court. You have to do what's called a financial affidavit as part of your financial disclosures. And a lot of times people will underestimate what they're paying on certain items far more than they overestimate just because you don't want to look like you're spending extravagantly. And you end up hurting yourself because you end up with either less of a deficit or more of a surplus than you actually have. And the circumstances of your case, when that happens, are negatively shown to the court.
Well, Josh, thank you for your time today. And that wraps up today's episode on alimony. Whether you're negotiating, paying, or receiving alimony, understanding the legal framework can make a huge difference in your case. If you've enjoyed this episode or know someone who could benefit from it, please share it and subscribe for more insights. Next time, we'll explore child support and how it's designed to protect the well being of children. Thanks for joining us on Law Unpacked. I'm attorney Sean. We'll see you real soon.